Okay, so Sola Scriptura contacted me and wanted to have a discussion, and so we had a live streamed discussion on his channel. I'm not sure if he's an ex-Adventist or not, but he was in opposition to the view that the little horn in Daniel chapter 8 is Rome. He supports the view that the little horn is Antiochus IV. And so that's what we discussed. So this is his channel, Sola Scriptura. And he contacted me underneath one of my posts in the comment section. So this was the post of mine, and he had contacted me here. Would you be willing to defend the 7 SDS, I guess mainly means SDA, position on Daniel 8 against the Antiochus position on, I guess he meant my channel? Not many have or will. I look forward to your response. I'll put a link to the live stream on his channel in the description under this video. But this is my recording that I did while we were discussing, and I hope this is a blessing to you. All right, well, so I guess we can...
Oh yeah, I would say if you want to start out with prayer, I mean, would you like to open up in prayer and then we can go live and start talking?
Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you, Lord, for being able to talk with Brandon today, and just pray for the leading of your Holy Spirit in our conversation, that each of us say what we intend to say, and in accordance with Ephesians 4:15, speak the truth in love, and gentleness and respect in accordance with 1 Peter 3:15. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right, we're going to go live. All right, grace and peace to the body. That is the church. I want to thank everybody who tunes into this video live or watches later. I know your time is important and precious to you, so I appreciate that you spend some of it here. With me tonight is my guest, Michael Mira.
Mira.
Mira, excuse me. But Michael Mira. And we're going to be discussing Daniel chapter 8. He's going to be coming from the SDA position, and I'm going to be coming from the Antiochus position. And so he'll probably present his information, and then I can kind of walk through my position real quick, and then we'll interact from there. So with that being said, Michael, if you have a screen you want to share or something, go ahead and do that, and I'll put it up on the screen for us to see.
Okay.
Or you want to introduce yourself as well. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, my name is Pastor Michael Mira. I'm a pastor in Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I was ordained back in 2013. I'm looking at my certificate there on the wall, just to remember. Yep, that was in December in the Greater New York Conference. So moved from Greater New York and to the Idaho Conference. I've been with the Idaho Conference for about 3 years now. And so it's a good thing. I do some street ministry. I did some street preaching back in New York. Used to do a lot of ministry, and I put up some of those videos on my YouTube channel, but I also have a Facebook Michael Mira Ministry page where some of those videos are up there as well. Interacted with a lot of people and found that you could have some good conversations if you're willing to speak the truth in love, gentleness, and respect, regardless of what position or what religion the other person is coming from. So I welcome the opportunity. I think it's a good thing to be able to speak with people of different perspectives, to hear one another out, and no reason why this should be a hostile or a problematic interaction. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity. Thank you. Brandon, right? Brandon?
Yeah, Brandon. Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, so I do appreciate that, and I definitely 100% agree with you that if conversations tend to be pretty hostile and aggressive, they usually don't go anywhere, and there's no fruit, and it doesn't honor the kingdom of God. And so, if we have a respectful dialogue, regardless of the topic, I think that is more beneficial for not only us but also the listener, who will, uh, you know, see our conduct, see how we're respectful, and then will want to hear what we have to say more. So, yeah, with that, if you want to share a screen, you're welcome to. If not, you can just present your position if you like, and this will be really casual. We'll just go back and forth, and I'm sure you can already tell I'm a pretty laid back person, and so we can just enjoy the time and interact.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll just share a few things, and then as we proceed forward, then maybe I'll share a screen. But just some basic things, I think, because I watched a couple of your videos in preparation for this, and so I think when we look at chapter 8 and consider the connection between chapter 8 and chapter 9 in Daniel, specifically the end portion of chapter 9 of Daniel, starting 9:21. I think it's important to consider that in 8, 16, and 17, Gabriel comes on the scene there. And so Gabriel's function is to help Daniel understand the vision. As you, okay, you got it right up there. Gabriel is there, and we see make this man understand the vision right at the end there of 8:16. And so the vision as a whole, if you look at verse 26, if you go down to verse number 26 there, and it says the vision of the evening's mornings. So then when we go back to 8:14, let's see how it reads over here. Evenings, morning. So there's 2,300 evenings, morning. So I think one of the areas where we're in disagreement is that the entire vision is referred to as evening mornings. That's not just referring to the work of the little horn. That's not just referring to that. It's almost like if you watch a movie and the movie is called, I'll just make up a name. The movie is called Jailbreak. And the whole movie is not breaking out of jail. You know, there's a story leading up to that, and maybe the last 10 minutes or the climax of the movie get into that. So the vision as a whole is referred to as evenings, mornings, and right from the beginning of the chapter, we see that it starts in the time of Medo-Persia, which is symbolized as the ram. And as you point out, that's pointed out in verse 20 and 21. It reveals to us that the ram is Medo-Persia and the goat is Greece. And so the entire vision is referred to by 2,300. It is the vision of the evenings, mornings, and Gabriel was to help Daniel understand that vision, okay? And by the end of the vision, by the end of chapter 8, I should say, verse 27, the very last verse, we could see that Daniel does not understand it. So unless Gabriel left his job undone, the ending of chapter 9 is where Gabriel comes back. Time has passed, and you correctly, there's a lot of things you said that I agree with, and you pointed out that you understood that chapter 9's prophecy was fulfilled in the first century A.D. So I think we have agreement there on the 70-week prophecy, which is really 10 Jubilee cycles. The 70-week prophecy, 490 years, is fulfilled in the first century. And so I guess we're both in agreement that you don't take that final year or that final week of years and kind of do what many do, where they say, well, there's this gap between the 69 weeks and then the 70th week, and that's going to be fulfilled at the end of time. So I think we're in agreement that that's not the case. But it's very clear, and I believe it's in 9:21 where we see that, 9:21 tells us there, Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision. The vision is referring to the vision of chapter 8. There is no vision in chapter 9. the prophecy at the end of chapter 9, the 70-week prophecy, is not a vision. So there is no vision in chapter 9. So when it says that Gabriel, right at the end of verse number 23, therefore consider the word and understand the vision, Gabriel is there completing the work. He didn't leave his job undone. Yet Daniel didn't completely understand. He got some basics, he got some understanding in chapter 8, but he clearly didn't fully understand by the end of the chapter. And so, as you had pointed out, in chapter 9, this chapter, right at the beginning, it shows us that that chapter is beginning in the time of Medo-Persian rule. So Daniel is perplexed because he had understood from the prophecy in Jeremiah, Jeremiah 29:10, Jeremiah 25, I think 11 and 12, speak of the 70-week prophecy. So he had understood, okay, when the 70 weeks of Babylonian captivity is done, we should be able, Jerusalem should no longer be desolate. And so he had understood, okay, 70 weeks is done, Babylon is no more. We're in the time of Medo-Persia now. Darius there, a descent, by descent a Mede, is the ruler pointed out right in the beginning of this chapter. And so Daniel had some questions. Well, what's going on here? And so it took some time, but Gabriel went back by the end of that chapter 9 to complete that task, which was left undone by the end of chapter 8. And so that's now the connection. Gabriel didn't leave the work undone. And so the prophecy, rather, specifically at the end of chapter 9, is really to help. It has the purpose of helping Daniel understand the vision of chapter 8. Now, like I said, the 2300 is not referring only to the work of the little horn. It's referring to the entire vision. The entire vision is referred to as the evenings, mornings, and there's 2300. And as we see, that vision starts with Medo-Persia, but it doesn't give the exact time. It doesn't give the exact time of where it starts. So that's in chapter 9, the 70-week prophecy. We see it's from the going forth. I think it's verse 24 or 25 in chapter 9. So that's kind of where I wanted to start. So that gives the exact, the beginning there of the 2300. And so these two prophecies are clearly connected because this is for the purpose of making Daniel understand the vision of chapter 8. So this is not separate. It wasn't that Daniel didn't understand and then Gabriel just left it at that and then he gave him another prophecy and said, I'm going to give you even more. No, the purpose of this was to help him to understand that. And that I think is important. So that's kind of the first point. I know that's a lot. I'd like you to respond to some of that before I go to some other things.
Yeah, sure. I think the probably I don't know if we say central point, but one of the main points we disagree on is, as you mentioned, the 2300. Is it years or is it days? When does it start? How do we know when it starts and everything? And as I start it with Antiochus. And the reason why I do that is, so in verse 13 you have, then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, for how long is the vision? And notice here he says, the vision that concerns the regular burnt offering. So the focus of the vision, even if it starts with Medo Persia, I think that kind of gives it more context of when the little horn arises. But it says this vision here, I believe that's Kazon, the Kazon concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot. So this vision has to do with the activity of the little horn. And the answer is, it is for 2300 evenings and mornings. So when we, if I'm to ask somebody a question, that answer is going to give me the time for how long it's going to take for whatever question might or whatever I asked that person. So I don't see anything from the text. Maybe you can point it out to me that we should have the evenings and mornings starting with Medo Persia here. You pointed out here in verse 26, the vision of the evenings and mornings, but I think it's more proper to understand what that evenings and mornings is from verses 13 and 14, which tells us that this vision is what the main focus or the concern of it is the activity of the little horn. And the activity of the little horn is what starts the 2300 evenings and mornings. And so when we talk about, well, Daniel was, excuse me, Daniel was appalled by the vision or didn't have full understanding of the vision. I don't think it's proper to say that is a reason why we would start with Medo Persia because he knew who Medo Persia was. I think it's safe to say that Daniel had a really good idea who the second beast was at this time of his visions. And I think this is more about because if you notice here, he's laying sick for some days. Now, why would he lay sick? It could be partly the visionary experience itself could have been overwhelming, but I think also it has to do with the activity of the little horn, which is the main focus. And this will make him sick because this little horn is going to trample underfoot his people. And he's in captivity right now. And he's probably thinking, well, we're in captivity right now for being disobedient. And so, Gabriel, you brought me a vision to tell me that in the future this is going to happen again. My people are going to be destroyed. And if you read up here in verse 19, for example, it says, "He said, Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation." Now, that indignation is God's wrath being poured out upon a people group, and this people group will be, I would posit that it would be the Jews, and the reason why, if we go up here to verse, I would posit that it would be the Jews, and the reason why, verse, is it 12? Yeah. So verse 12, and a host will be given over to it. So this host will be given over to it. The it is the little horn. So
Yes.
the host will be given over to the little horn together with the regular burnt offering. And this is because of transgressions. So just like in the first captivity with Babylon, that if Daniel mentions here, he points out that it's because of our transgressions that you have poured this indignation and made Jerusalem desolate. In like manner, here in chapter 8, this is going to happen under the reign of the third beast, namely Antiochus. And the third beast is Greece for those who do not know. And so that is a walkthrough. I may have missed a couple of points, but that's a walkthrough of why I would disagree with what you said, and I would put the 2300 specifically starting with the activity of the little horn whenever we want to say that happens. And then one more thing, real quick, I would point out is if we have a starting point of 457 BC, I think there is an issue with that because, again, this 2300 is linked with the activity of the little horn, and this tramples the sanctuary, tears down the sanctuary, whereas the decree in chapter 9 is building up of the sanctuary. So we have to question I would ask is when does this activity in verse 13 happen? Because it cannot happen in 457 BC. And I'm sure you don't believe that, but we'd have to go through that as well too. So that being said, if you want to interact with what I said, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, I want to try and you mentioned a lot of things, so I'm probably gonna miss a lot of what I'm saying in this response, but I think one of the key points we have to look at, going right back to 13, where it says, "For how long is the vision?" The vision is the question. How long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offerings? Now, your translation says they're burnt offerings. And I believe in the Hebrew, if you've got the Hebrew for that, what has been translated there, I think the daily, or the tamid is the word used referring to the daily. It doesn't specifically say offerings or sacrifices, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's referring to the daily, which would include sacrifices, but the daily ministry was an intercessory ministry, which did also involve incense. There's the incense, for example, at the end of the chapter 30 of Exodus. I think it's chapter 30 and verses 6 to 8, referring to the evening and morning incense offerings. And then there's also in chapter 29 of Exodus, you have around verse 38 and 39 of Exodus, the sacrifices every evening morning. So every evening morning is the incense, every evening morning is the sacrifice, the tending to the lamps, Exodus 27, verse 20 and 21. And so evening and morning and continual is related to all those things. And so it's an intercessory ministry. It's an intercessory ministry which isn't only involving the sacrifice, because the incense was linked with prayer and atonement. For example, in chapter 16 of Numbers 46, incense is used to make atonement. In Psalm 141, verse 2, incense is joined with prayer. In the New Testament, in Luke 1:10, the people were praying at the time of the incense. And so the daily intercessory ministry is really what is under attack by that little horn. And so, I'm going to have to disagree, and I guess, people are going to have to make a decision on that, but I don't see that vision only referring to the activities of the little horn. It's yes, the vision ultimately brings us, just like watching a movie about a jailbreak. You get the backstory, you get all it. You don't just start with the jailbreak, you get all of that stuff. So in this vision, you start with Medo-Persia. You start at that point, and then you are brought up to the time of the activity of little horn. So I kind of want to, I know I'm not answering everything you're saying, but I kind of want to look at the little horn now, because when you look at the little horn, specifically, if you read Daniel 8 and verse, what translation of the Bible is this, by the way?
English Standard Version, but I can use whatever you prefer to use.
Oh, if you don't mind, can you use the New King James?
I might actually not have that one.
Oh, you might not have that?
See.
Okay.
Let me see. That's actually one I do not have. I don't know if you can see, but up here where my mouse is are all the versions I have available on this program.
Okay. Well, anyway, there's an interesting book called Who's Afraid of the Judgment by Roy Gain. And Roy Gain's actually a Hebrew Adventist scholar. And so I have the book right in front of me. So I just want to read a passage here from that book on page 37. Roy Gain points out.
Real quick, you want to show the book up to the screen so everybody can see that?
I don't.
Perfect. Yeah.
I'm a little tiny square there in the corner. So in this book, one of the points that he makes here is in Daniel chapter 8, the Medo-Persian Ram magnified himself. That's verse 4. And he is a scholar of the Hebrew. So he's considering the actual original language and how this is written here. And then he says, Alexander's Greek goat magnified himself exceedingly. And that's verse number 8. And the little horn grew exceedingly great. Verse 9. Antiochus never achieved the greatness comparable to that of Alexander the Great or even Medo-Persia. So I think when we look at the context of the chapter, we're seeing that the goat and the ram and the little horn, they're all being compared in terms of greatness, militarily, in terms of conquest. And so there's no way, because Antiochus really was a failure militarily. He had some level of success. He did have some level of success, but the truth of the matter is that he started out as a prisoner of Rome. First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 10 points that out. And then in 168, the elder Roman statesman Gaius Pompilius Lianus, I believe is how I'm probably butchering his name, but Gaius Pompilius or Pompeius Lianus, I think is how. Well, that's how I'm going to say it. Basically, this Roman statesman, when Antiochus was on conquest, when he was in military, he was on a military expedition in Egypt. And basically, the story goes that he ran into this Roman statesman, and the Roman statesman said, "Hey, you know what? The senators in Rome, they want you to pull out of Egypt. They want you to pull your forces out of here, pull them out of Cyprus." And then Antiochus IV said, "Okay, give me some time to think about it." And you might know the story where basically Pompilius Lianus says, "Okay," he draws a circle around him, and he says, "You have as long as you can stand in that circle to think about the story. And if you don't pull out, you can consider yourself at war with Rome." And so he ended up pulling out. So he was in nobody bound the expansion of the ram, and even in the language of chapter 8, the ram did whatever it wanted. When the goat came on the scene, the goat did whatever it wanted, and then the little horn does. So the greatness and the expansion of the little horn is compared with those other two. That cannot in any way be said of Antiochus IV.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the story, and actually, there's I don't have it on top of my head, but I have it shared, I believe, in the comments of one or two of my videos. There's a lot of scholarship that's come out and has actually pointed out how great Antiochus did and how he came from nothing and ended up being, if you know the history of the empire, being probably as great, if not greater, than his father, which his father was probably the greatest ruler uh, of the Syrian Empire throughout its time after the Four Horns broke off. But real quick, and then we can get into Little Horn, and I'll answer what I can. And this is, I would say, this is probably one of the weaker points of the Antiochus position. So it's definitely smart for you to address to point this out. Um, before I forget, I wanted to mention this, and this is a question I have for you, and you can answer later if you want, or now, it's up to you. Um, he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then, meaning after the 2,300 are done, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. So what this tells me, in my mind, what this tells me is that for 2,300, however long that is, excuse me, um, the sanctuary is not in its rightful state. And so the question is if we start in 457 BC, that must mean that it's not being restored and put to its rightful state. It must be trampled down upon, torn down, or whatever terminology you want to use for that. And so I would ask you, do you see that this way, that for 2,300, the sanctuary is trampled upon or trampled underfoot, and at the end of it, the sanctuary is restored to its rightful state? So I don't know if you want to answer that now or later, and I can go through the little
Yeah,
horn
no,
stuff
no,
more.
I can address that because that's answering the question, how long is the vision? The vision is 2,300. Now, if you say that that's literal 2,300 days, then that's a little over 7 years. But the vision itself is concerning the rise and fall of empires, which I understand to be Medo-Persia, then Greece, and then going on into Rome. But even if you say, well, Rome doesn't come in the picture, and you say it's Medo-Persia and Greece, still, it doesn't work out that that's 7 years. So, because Medo-Persia came into power about 538, 539, and then the Greeks come in there 331. So, I'm curious, how do you understand that 2,300? Do you understand that to be years or to be days? And if it's days, it's about what, a little over 6 years or 7 years?
So I would hold to it to be days, and I would hold to it to the 1,150 days position. I don't know if you're familiar with
Oh,
that.
yeah. So you divide those up, but
Yeah.
now if you do that and you divide that, so you say, well, this is just referring to sacrifices. So you got a morning sacrifice, you got an evening sacrifice, and so that justifies creating this 1150 days. But what in the text actually justifies separating the evenings and mornings into the and dividing it like that?
I would say there's nothing directly stating it in the text. What I would say is that it's using prophetic symbolic language. And I think the way it's doing that is by focusing a lot on the Hatamid. So the Hatamid, where this version translates it as the regular burnt offering, is the one that is morning and evening. And so whenever the Tamid, so the regular, whenever the word Tamid has the definite article in front of it, and you can look into this more and see, if I'm accurate or not. But when it has the definite article ha before it, it refers to the sacrifice specifically. And so if it has an identifier before it, so if it's referring to a different type of daily activities or a different type of tamid activity, like the ones you mentioned, then it'll have that specific um, um, the specific ritual um, or activity placed before that. So it's an identifier to tell you what is the daily. But if it only has the definite article, so ha tamid, then it's referring to the sacrifice. So that's why I would then split up into 1150.
And so, what? But 1150 is not a number mentioned in any of these prophecies.
Right. Yeah. I think that's part of it. Could be part of Daniel's confusion. 2300. A lot of times symbol or prophetic time is not literal. I don't think, and I believe you hold to this position as well too. That it's not going to be literally 2,300 days. It's either going to be years, which I reject, or it's going to be split in half. And again, the reason why is because of the Hatamid for evening and morning Hatamid, which is why it says evening and morning, and no other time prophecy that I'm aware of in the Bible has 23 or has the time and then it has evening and morning after it, kind of showing that look, this little horn is going to take away the Hatamid, and also it's going to last for 2,300 evenings and mornings. And it just so happens that the regular burnt offering is given evening and morning. And if I remember correctly, the regular burnt offering is it's not a atonement. It's simply a pleasing aroma to the Lord, something that the Lord commanded, and it doesn't cleanse. It's not for any type of atonement. It is simply for His pleasure. And that
Okay, so this understanding that you have ultimately would yield a number in terms of years that's not pointed out in this chapter. 1150 years, in other words.
no, I would stick to days. It's cut in
I'm
half.
sorry, 1150 days.
Yeah,
So
correct.
you would say that that's really okay. So if it's 1150 days, but according to, and again, if you don't mind, and I think you did refer to Antiquities book 12, chapter 7, verse 6, but I think that basically is saying it was 3 years. It was 3 years, and the dedication was 3 years to the day. So if it's 3 years to the day, that works out to, from Jewish reckoning, about 1,080 days, or if you go by our years, 365 days in a year, about 1,095. So, and both Josephus's reference, and if you compare Maccabees, First Maccabees chapter 1, 57 and 54, and chapter 4, verse 52, if you look at those references, they accord with Josephus that it was 3 years. It was exactly 3 years of defilement by Antiochus in these terms, and that doesn't fit 1150 either.
Yeah, yeah. So I would start it at a different time than they do, and the reason why is here in verse 11 it says, "It became great," and it refers to the little horn. So the little horn became great, even as great as the prince of the host. Notice the very first thing that is mentioned, and the regular burnt offering or the hatamid was taken away from him. And so if we look in First Maccabees 1, uh, let me get the verses real quick. I forget them off the top of my head. I think it's verse 20. Let me see. Okay, maybe 29. Let's see. There, it talks in here. Okay, so yeah, verse 29. It says, "And after 2 years fully expired, the king sent his chief collector of tribute unto the cities of Judea, who came unto Jerusalem with a great multitude." So that's the army he came with. So at this time, right here, when they go in and they ransack the most holy and the holy, this is when the 1150 start. Now, First Maccabees does not give an exact date, but this is a little bit before. I forget exactly. It's like 30 or 60 days. Some that's just roughly. Uh, before the time that Josephus uses. And so this would fit well with 1150. And again, we're not given a date on when this happens. And so it could be off by a little bit, but this is why I would start it, or this is why I would use 1150. And this is where I would start it right here.
So, but you're going to that verse not based specifically on what's stated, because what you would admit that what's stated is 3 years to the day. It doesn't neither Josephus or the author of Maccabees go beyond mentioning 3 years. They say it was defiled, and 3 years to the day later it was dedicated. So you're going to this verse, and even you admit it doesn't say anything as far as the exact time. So you basically have the conclusion that the 1150 must be correct, and then that leads you to read into this verse that possibility, even though it doesn't say it.
Right. So yeah. So Josephus, uh, definitely, I would disagree with his starting point. And again, the reason why here. So if we keep reading at verse 30, I'll start in verse 29 at the end. Who came unto Jerusalem with a great multitude and spake peaceable words unto them, but deceit. For when they had given him credence, he fell suddenly upon the city and smote it very sore and destroyed much people of Israel. So this is already the little horn's already becoming active now. And when he had taken the spoils of the city, he set it on fire and pulled down the houses and walls thereof on every side. But the
Okay.
women and children took they captive and possessed the cattle. And so this right here, the little horn has become active, defiled Jerusalem, trampled them underfoot, did all that the activity of the little horn. There's more to come because it lasts for 1150 days. But that's again that's why I started here. And yes, I would agree. I think Josephus is wrong. Obviously, he did not think that, but and I forget your other question. I
Yeah,
apologize.
because Josephus does point to it being 3 years. He
Yeah,
does do that, and and
yeah,
and here in, well, I'm using my New English Bible, but in verse number 54 of this chapter, chapter 154, it says,
yeah.
"On the 15th day of the month of Kislev in the year 145, the abomination of desolation was set up on the altar." So he's specifically saying it happened here, and according to the comment down here, and this is not an Adventist, this is a New English Bible, it says that is 167 BC. And then when I jump ahead and I go to the fourth chapter, and let's see over here, chapter 4. Oh, I'm sorry, I went a little bit ahead. Let's see. I wish these chapter indicators were a little bigger. Oh, I'm in chapter 6. You see, when you get older, you. Now, chapter 4, verse 52, and then it says, "Then early on the 25th day of the ninth month, the month of Kislev, in the year 148, sacrifice was offered as the law commanded on the newly made altar of burnt offering. On the anniversary of the day when the Gentiles profaned it." And again, my commentary points to this being 164. So they're saying there, as Josephus is, that it began
Yeah.
167 and it ended 164. So both sources are given 3 years. They're not, neither one of them are giving 1150, and even what you're pointing out doesn't say 11. I'm sorry, 1150. Yeah, 1150.
Yeah, yeah, no, my position is definitely not a majority position. If you read a lot of even for pastors, theologians, scholars, I didn't find a whole lot. There are some, but I don't have my resources on hand with me, so I apologize. But so the abomination of desolation, if you notice, it's not mentioned here in chapter 8. That's chapter 11 and 12. And so that quote, although Antiochus did set up an abomination of desolation, that was not what started the 2300. The 2300 is about the transgression that makes desolate. So the Jews transgressing, and because of that, desolation comes, and the little horn takes away the regular burnt offering, and the place of the sanctuary is overthrown and tramples the host. That's what this vision is focused on. And so that's why I would start it where I did, because what I read was, again, it was like, off the top of my head, it's like roughly 30 month to two in between there before that abomination of desolation is mentioned.
Okay, so you don't view the little. So you would say the little horn is not committing the abomination of desolation. Yeah, I mean you say that's Antiochus.
Well, yeah, he did, but this chapter 8, is does not mention abomination of desolation. That's what starts the 2300. 2300 is started by the activity of the little horn, which is uh, taking away the regular burnt offering, trampling the host and sanctuary underfoot. Those three activities are mentioned here.
Okay, so that's to be clear. That is not the abomination of desolation in your view. But that is the work of Antiochus.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
But
I'd
that
have to
you're saying that is not the abomination of desolation. That's not referring to that.
I'd have to refresh on um, what exactly that refers to. I can't recall if that is a specific term referring to, say, like the sacrifices that Antiochus did on the altar with the swines, or it could be something else. I have to refresh my memory on that, so I apologize.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So as far as the other point that I made, you don't see the little horn. You don't see the little horn in verse number 9 as being compared with the greatness of Alexander the Great, or the United Kingdom, so to speak, in verse 8, the goat with a single horn, and the greatness of Media Persia in verse 4. You don't see the context putting those, saying this one grew great, this one grew very great, this one grew exceedingly great. You don't see you don't see that one is growing greater than the next one, and so the little horn is greater than the other two. You don't see that.
I would not see it that way exactly, and I'll explain to you why. You have, you know, the single horn here on the goat, and that is Alexander the Great. And then from that, you have and I'll just read it real quick so that way it's fresh in my mind, everybody's mind. It says in verse 7, I saw him come close, or actually, I'll read verse 6, excuse me. Actually, verse 5, excuse me. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. So the goat is the great kingdom, and the conspicuous horn is the first king, that is Alexander the Great. He came to the ram with the two horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his two horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. So, in other words, the third beast, that is Greece, conquered the second beast, that is Medo Persia.
Yeah.
Um, Verse 8, then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came up four conspicuous horns towards the four winds of heaven. So the goat became exceedingly great. So that refers most likely to the expansion of Alexander the Great, and it kind of mentions there when it talks about the goat. How do they say it? The male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. So, in other words, quick expansion,
Hmm.
a lot of expansion under a short period of time.
Yeah.
Uh, and so
And
that's
that
the
and that
expansion.
kind of fits with the four wings of the leopard in chapter
Correct.
7. Very,
I would
very
agree.
fast.
Exactly. Yeah, that would complement that very well. Yeah, exactly. Then the goat became exceedingly great, so that explains that there. But when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it came up four conspicuous horns. So you have a breaking of this greatness, I would say, into four conspicuous horns, and these horns are towards the four winds of heaven. So there's four horns, and none of them are equal to the greatness of the single horn that was before them.
That's right.
And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards. Now he grew, so he starts small as a small little horn. So he has to grow exceedingly great towards the south, the east, and the glorious land. But I think the main focus of the vision, although it does mention the south,
Now, would you say the glorious land is Israel?
yes, yes, I would.
Okay. Because the reason I'm asking is Antiochus got kicked out of Israel. So, so how did he grow great toward? I mean, he didn't even conquer it. He inherited it from his father. He didn't conquer it, and he was kicked out of it.
Yeah, so I would say it's not conquering the land and taking the land. The vision explains what it is, I think. And so, verse 10, it says, and this is why I say this because this verse here focuses on why it's great or exceedingly great. It says, notice it doesn't even say exceedingly great again. It only says it grew great, even to the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. So this is why it's being referred to as great. Notice here as well, it became great, even as great as the prince of the host.
Now, who would you say the prince of the host is?
That's most likely Christ.
Oh, okay, okay. So we're in agreement on that as well.
Yeah. So the greatness of this is explained here in verse 10 and 11 because it is brought forth by God, which is explained in verses 16 to 26 or 14 or 15 through 26, excuse me. Um, but historians will comment on this, and there are a number who are perplexed, and I think they're the ones who are probably the atheistic or agnostic historians. But they're perplexed as to why, out of all of the rulers in this kingdom here, the Syrian kingdom, why Alexander the Great, Antiochus the Fourth was the only one that was com- utterly depraved and wicked towards the Jews. None of the other rulers before him and after him were horrendous towards the Jews. Only he was, and there's many of them who can't even really explain why. They don't see why. Obviously, we do because it, or I do at least, it's because it's prophecy. Um, but I think that is telling in itself as well too. And even Alexander the Great, from my understanding, was not nearly as harsh towards the Jews as Antiochus was. And so that's why I would say the exceedingly greatness of this little horn, which again in verse 10, it doesn't even say exceedingly great, it just says great. Um, but the main focus of this greatness is in verses 10 and 11, which is it grew great to the host of heaven, and some of the hosts and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as, and I would say that is exceedingly great right there. If you want to say something is exceedingly great, it became great as the prince of the host, and that is because he took the regular burnt offering away, and the place of the sanctuary was overthrown. So that's why I would say hold to that.
You're probably familiar with the Adventist position that that this little horn is basically expressing Rome in two phases.
Yeah. You can refresh my memory. It's been a while since I read on that, but yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Because now there is the other position
Papal and
that's,
pagan Rome.
yeah, and then there's also the position that the horn is coming out of the winds, one of the winds,
Yeah.
rather than, or one of the direction of the compass. And that's a position that scholars like Richard Davidson, he has that in his book, Song for the Sanctuary. Jacques Ducan has that. Um, Roy Gain also has that in his book. I think he might have changed his view on that, but it doesn't change his position, because even if you view the horn as coming out of one of the horns, in other words, if you say that those four horns represent the divisions of Greece, and you say that the little horn is coming out of one of them, you can still see from the context that that little horn is greater than the ram and the goat. But you could relate it to Rome, because Rome did come out of Greece culturally, religiously, um, uh, also politically. Rome pretty much, if you study, in a general sense, it doesn't take deep study to realize that Persia didn't come out of Babylon in any way. Persia didn't take from Babylon. Persia was unique from Babylon, culturally, spiritually, in any other way. I don't know if you do a quick search on Google and see what AI turns out, and you write down, did Persian culture come from Babylon? I've never heard anyone say that it did. I've never heard anyone say that Greek culture came out of Persian. They're unique cultures, but Rome they say that Rome conquered on the battlefield, but Greece conquered in the classroom. Rome pretty much did come out of Greece in that sense, culturally, So what I'm saying is, I kind of lean toward the Hebrew actually supporting that the little horn doesn't come out of one of the four horns. But even if you do argue that it does, because of the greatness of that little horn and how it relates, I think the parallels, I don't think it's a coincidence that that little horn parallels the little horn in chapter 7. In fact, that's pretty much the strongest parallel, because as far as the beasts go, you don't see that imagery repeated in chapter 8, but you do see the little horn. So I think that the little horn, the greatness of the little horn, and the fact that it does mention those directions of the compass in chapter 8, verse 9, you can't use the other two verses to take away from that. So even if you say, well, the greatness is explained in verse 10, where we see that vertical greatness, it still specifically mentions the directions of the compass. And that also relates to how the ram is spoken about and how the goat's spoken about. They're spoken in relation to directions of the compass, coming from here, coming from that direction, conquering in temporal directions. So I think that when you look at that, and also I kind of want to throw into the mix here and see what you think of it, because I'm not sure if I heard, but in Matthew 24 and verse 15 and 16, if you compare that with Luke 21:20 and 21, it makes it clear that that abomination of desolation is in the future. So that couldn't be referring to Antiochus. And he says spoken of by Daniel there. And if you look at, so you've got the Matthew 24 there. And if you look at the parallel verse in Luke 21:20 and 21, it's referring to the armies of Rome.
Yeah. So that would be, I would say this is referring to what's spoken of in chapter 9. Now, there is an early church father who I believe is, what's his name? Clement of Alexandria, who held that chapter 8 referred to the same time period, the same events of chapter 9, which I thought was pretty fascinating to read and hear his thoughts on that. But I would say this is referring to what's spoken of in chapter 9.
So when Jesus is speaking of of that abomination of desolation spoken of in Daniel chapter 8. And you do see the parallel between Luke 21:20 and Matthew 24:15 and 16. You see that parallel.
Yeah, I think it's referring to the same thing. Yeah.
And he's saying that's spoken of. So you're saying that that's not referring to the little horn.
Not referring to the little horn of chapter 8.
Do you believe that
Right.
little horn of chapter 7 is the little horn of chapter 8?
No, no. I don't see in chapter 8. We can go through wherever you want in chapter 8, but I don't see anywhere in chapter 8 where it transitions from the third beast to the fourth beast. And if you look, the other time that the little horn is mentioned, the little horn never transitions to another beast. It's always a part of the beast it grows on. So in chapter 8, the little horn grows on the third beast, so it's part of the third beast. Chapter 4, the little horn grows on the fourth beast, it's part of the fourth beast. It doesn't become the fifth beast, or the little horn in chapter 8 doesn't become the fourth beast.
Okay, so but would you see in chapter 8 that well, let me do a more general question. When Jesus gives a parable, would you think it would be theologically correct to look beyond the purpose of the parable and to start reading meaning into every detail of the parable? Or would you say, well, we first got to look at the purpose of the parable and try not to go beyond what Jesus is saying by the parable?
I tend not to go beyond what's being said in the text. I do know that there's some benefit for going beyond in a personal level, but to build doctrine, I especially doctrine that is to be held by believers, I would stick to what's in the text.
Right,
That
and
makes
I would
sense.
agree. I would agree. And I think when it comes to these prophecies, it's the same thing. So basically, the reason we're not seeing a beast, but rather a horn representing Rome, is because the imagery in chapter 8 is focused on the sanctuary, and particularly the Day of Atonement, where the ram and the goat were of key importance. If you read chapter 16 of Leviticus, you see that there. So it's sanctuary imagery, and the imagery is confined to that. But I think when you look at the little horn, I think it's very hard, and I've always, even before I really studied these things out, I said that it can't be a coincidence that language referring to the little horn in chapter 7 parallels that of chapter 8. And that's why I believe that you're being honest with the scripture if you say this is the same power. And
Yeah,
and I also, I'm sorry, I just want to make one last point. If you go to 8 and verse number 22 and 23, I wanted to make a last point on this before I forget. You see what it says there? It says, as for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 horns arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from this nation, but not with its power. And then it says, at the latter end of their kingdom, when transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. So there's 2 points there, I think, that favors my position over the Antiochus position. One of them is it's very clear that once that splitting of that one horn happens, it's clear that those 4 horns did not have the power of the unified kingdom of Alexander the Great. So I think that is one reason that shows this can't be Antiochus, because I said before that the little horn is presented as being more powerful than the goat and the ram. And yet this is saying, no, once that splitting happened, they did not have his power. So that can't be Antiochus there. And then the other one is that says in the later end of their kingdom. Antiochus was more toward the middle of that line of Seleucid kings. He wasn't toward the later end. So he was at the middle. He was more toward the middle. And right even in his time, Rome was rising in power. And Rome bound him. The ram with 2 horns was unbound until the goat came along. The goat was unbound until the little horn came along. And once Rome was emerging, They held Antiochus in check. Antiochus was afraid of Rome. Like I said, that story of Gaius Pompilius Linnæus shows us that he was held in check by Rome. They basically said, "You pull out, or or we mean business." And he said, "Okay, I'm getting out of here."
Yeah. So how so I would see Antiochus as a shadow fulfillment of a future antichrist to come, and I think we see that again in uh, with other persecuting powers like that we see in chapter 9 through Rome. And then it'll culminate in the last one in the Great Tribulation. And so I don't, it just, when the little horn arises, regardless of how you see it, if there's more than one little horn that rises in the future, it's going to be similar or the same to the previous little horn or the Antichrist power. I don't even know actually. If, I think you do, but I assume you would hold to this little horn as the Antichrist power, correct?
Yeah, I well, I'm careful when I use that language because the in the book of Revelation the word beast is used.
Right.
It doesn't actually say antichrist, but I know, I agree generally what people mean when they say that, but John uses the term because John wrote Revelation, and in his letters he referred to the antichrist as those who denied Christ came in the flesh, so some form of Gnostics. So, but I think when they say Antichrist in connection with the book of Revelation, they mean the beast system. And I would say, yeah, because if you look at the beast of Revelation 13, that beast is the little horn. He's doing the things of the little horn. He's attacking the sanctuary of heaven. And I guess we have the difference on that because we believe in the heavenly sanctuary. But it mentions him blaspheming God's tabernacle, and in verse number 6 of Revelation 13, his mouth is prominent. The little horn's eyes and mouth of Daniel 7 are made prominent. And I would say that the spiritual conquest of the little horn in 7, him changing times and laws, referring to God's times and law, him ruling for a period of time and a half, 1260, that relates to the beast in Revelation 13 and verse 5. And I would say the little horn in chapter 8 is doing the same thing. He's attacking the things of God. And so I don't think the Bible would really put so many parallels coincidentally.
Right. Yeah. So the point was simply that regardless of what your position is on a beast system or a antichrist power or whatever you want to call it, if it recapitulates or there's a shadow fulfillment of it, and then there's going to be a final end time, those previous ones are going to have similarities to them. And so that's what I'm seeing here in chapter 8 with this little horn and the little horn in chapter 7. They're going to have similarities because they're doing similar things. So just because they have similarities, though, does not
Yeah.
mean are
No,
the
I
same
understand.
exact power. So that was the point for that. With the latter end of or what does it say? Which one?
23.
23. And at the latter end of their kingdom, yeah. So their kingdom. So all four. If you look, you study this Hebrew word here, uh, latter end or latter time. The latter. Let me see. It. I found that it could be used to refer to something that is in the middle, going towards the end of something of a time period, and it's used in Job that way. About, I believe it's about Job's life and how old he was. Like it refers to the latter end of his life, but he was only like halfway through his years before he died. And so it seems like the word is not so strict. And I'm not a Hebrew scholar, so you want to consult those who are with this. But it seems like when it's used in the Bible, unless there's something in here in the Hebrew text that doesn't allow that here in Daniel 8, that it's not so strict that it cannot refer to something that is in the middle, going towards the end of its reign or time period.
But that those definitions down there don't say that. I mean, at least those ones that I saw right underneath. It says
Right.
after part, end, issue, event, latter time, last, hindermost. So that's why I'm saying that it wouldn't fit with Antiochus, because he wasn't.
Yeah. So, but the way it's used, though, like I gave the example, and I don't have the text again off the top of my head. It's in Job. I think Job, maybe chapter 30 or somewhere around there, roughly. You can look into it. It is used in the way I just described. So even if it doesn't have that exact definition I gave here, it is used that way in there. So maybe one of these can mean that or something. But um, maybe Strong's will have it.
Well, like I said, when it comes to reading these things and interpreting them, everybody has to. I guess you got to be honest. Obviously, you got to be honest with the Holy Spirit, right? You got to prayerfully read the
Yes.
text, and if you come to a conclusion that's really, I think that anybody who's honest, the ultimate teacher is the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
So if you're prayerfully reading and allowing the Holy Spirit to lead, He's going to lead you into all truth, because that's what Jesus said He would do.
Yes. Yes. Amen to that for sure. And so the reason
But
why
you had asked a question earlier that I never answered. Something
uh,
about 457, and I think it was
oh,
related to the cleansing of the sanctuary, something like that.
oh, yeah, yeah, okay, yeah,
I don't remember how exactly I asked it, but I just remembered I didn't answer that.
yeah. So here in verse 14, it says, "He said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored." So the way this is written, it seems to me that it's saying that the whole time this part is going on, so the 2,300, the whole time that's going on, the sanctuary is not in its rightful state, because it says for 2,300, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. So in other words, for that length of period, the sanctuary is not in its rightful state. It's trampled down or destroyed or desecrated or whatever terminology you want to use for that. But and so I don't see when we start in 457 BC any event happening in 457 BC that would cause it to be not being restored to its rightful state, because in chapter 9 it seems to be saying the exact opposite, that it is being restored because the decree goes out to restore it.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Well, I would say, like I said before, I think that the 2,300 evenings, mornings is referring to the whole prophecy. And so when I read this text here and it says, He said unto me 2,300 evenings, mornings, that's referring to the length of this prophecy that begins sometime in the Medo-Persian kingdom. And then it says, so when exactly in the Medo-Persian kingdom? That's in chapter 9 at the end, where it says the going forth of the commandment to restore and rebuild. The restoring, the way that word is used in Scripture, do a study on that word, with the Hebrew and find where it's used. It's basically the returning. So you have the restoring and the rebuilding. The restoring is not the rebuilding. The restoring has to happen, and then the rebuilding. So Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, Cyrus and Darius gave decrees to rebuild the temple, but they didn't restore Israel. They didn't restore Jerusalem to the power of the Jewish nation. They didn't restore that. It was Artaxerxes who restored. And that's the decree you see in chapter 7 of Ezra. So that, and it points out that was in the 7th year of Artaxerxes, which was the 457. So that is giving the starting point of the 2,300. And then it says, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. In other words, that's not the length of time that the sanctuary is defiled, but that's the length of time that it will take until the sanctuary is restored, which I would say is referring to the cleansing, because now there is, that'd be a deeper study, but basically the word for restored or justified is made parallel with cleansing, and also the word used for cleansing in chapter 16, 19. There's a few verses that kind of show that those words are made parallel in Job 25:4, Job 15:14, and Proverbs 29:10. You could see basically throughout these texts that these words are made parallel to one another: justifying, cleansing, being made pure. And that's the word, and that hooks into the chapter on the atonement, and in the context of chapter 16 of Leviticus, it's referring to the Day of Atonement. So that's how I understand it. And so the Adventist point of view is that 1844. That's basically when that day, that heavenly Day of Atonement began. So that's kind of how
Yeah.
I see that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just not seeing that in this text, honestly. Because like an example, if I said, how am I going to word this? Let's see. If I said, for 3 hours, I'm going to be driving to your house, then I will be at your house. Very simple example, but for 2300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored. It just seemed to me in just plain simple reading of the text, and maybe it's just too simple of a reading. I don't know, but for 2300 evenings and mornings, the sanctuary is not in its rightful state because at the end of the 2300 is when the sanctuary is restored to its rightful state, whatever you want to say that is. So something has to happen at the beginning of the 2300 for the sanctuary not to be restored and needing to be restored at the end of it.
Yeah,
So that's
well, that's. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
no, you're good. I was just saying that, and that's why I just I can't hold to the position that you're promoting. It just seems like it. I don't know. It just seems clear in my head right here that when I read this, that the sanctuary is trampled, desecrated, destroyed, whatever, and needs to be restored.
Yeah, I think that, and I understand what you mean, but the way that I see it is the little horn is specifically going after the prince of the host. So what he's doing is an attack on Christ. And you could see that there in what verse 11 is it? It mentions the prince of the host, which both of us agree that is referring to Christ. And an army is given over to it to do that. So again, I mean, this would connect to other prophecies, but me seeing that this little horn is referring to Rome, but this vertical attack of Rome is referring to the papal phase, and it also parallels and relates to the attack of the beast, because I believe the beast in Revelation 13, that we see the things that he's doing, his blasphemous words and his attack in verse number 6, 5 and 6, that's all referring to the same type of thing. And so it's referring to the now obviously no earthly power can actually ascend to God's heavenly kingdom, or to God's heavenly throne and to God's heavenly sanctuary and physically go up there and do these things. But it's a way of referring to how these things are done and how they affect, spiritually, how they affect people here on earth. And so basically, the papal system, the Catholic Church, an army was given over to it. They never had their own army, but they received armies from secular powers. And ultimately, one of the important years in prophecy is 508. And so in 508 was when Clovis, king of the Franks, joined politically with the Catholic Church in order to establish the papal monopoly. And so I grew up in the Catholic system, and I became Adventist probably in my early to mid 20s. And they do have a counterfeit, and that's basically the counterfeit intercessory system, because the daily is referring, as I said before, to the intercessory ministry. We're dealing with the incense, the prayers. It's ultimately referring to the daily intercessory ministry of Christ. And we're said that we can come boldly before the throne of grace. But in the Catholic system, basically, which gained its monopoly and that crucial point in time when Clovis joined politically with the Catholic Church and defeated the Visigoths at the Battle of Vouillé in 507. So once he did that, that kind of changed it. He beat them back into Spain. The Frankish kingdom expanded. So they were the eldest daughter of the Catholic Church in Europe. And they enabled that monopoly to happen. And now the Catholic Church had, before, well, a little after that, well, not even after that, but right around that period of time, they also had the armies of Justinian, who had defeated the Ostrogoths and the Rugi and the Vandals, but basically the Catholic system has a counterfeit intercessory system where you have to confess to priests. You got to receive the sacraments, which are basically the distributions of Christ's grace through the church. So you got to go through the church, and that pretty much dominated the medieval European landscape, and that's what I see as the attack on the intercessory or on the daily work of Christ. Basically, they obscured Christ. It was blasphemy. Blasphemy is putting man in the place of God, so it's a blasphemous system. It elevated the thrones of popes and bishops and put them as the intercessor. And that was and the gospel ultimately is part of that, and so the gospel was obscured with all of these traditions and scholastic what do they call it, scholasticism in theology and the influence of Greek thought, Aristotle and so forth, and all of that kind of stuff. So the Greek basis, really, the Greek basis for Orthodox theology, I think also makes sense because, as I said, Rome was really an extension of Greek culture, or they absorbed Greek culture and Greek ideas and Greek philosophy, and that entered into the church, and that's why you have the Orthodox views of the Trinity. The Adventist view of the Trinity is different from the Orthodox view. I have a video on that. But all of that stuff, I think, obscures the gospel. And that was, I think, when the Adventists came along in the 1844 period, and they started to really restore the biblical concept of Christ's heavenly priesthood, ministry, and the gospel. I think that also connects to the cleansing of the sanctuary and really bringing into view the ministry of Christ, the heavenly priestly ministry of Christ, and the true gospel which involves it. So I said a mouthful, so I'll stay quiet for a while.
No, no, you're good. I'm a Protestant, so I'm definitely not friendly to the papist theology in any way, shape, or form. But I think actually we might. I'll give you that. That was probably going to be the last. I know I didn't tell you that, so you can, if you have other things you want to say, you're welcome to say that. But that was kind of nice to end your position on, I think. And we're gonna go through, if you want, some questions that are in the live chat from an individual. But if you want to make any more points, you're more than welcome to. I'll let you have the last word. But if not, what you said there was a pretty good summation of the Adventist position, I think.
Yeah, no, I think I've said more than enough. I can be long winded. So unless you have a question for me, I'll just take it easy. I mean,
No,
you've been more than gracious. I really have to say I commend you for that, and I appreciate that.
thank you. I appreciate you coming on for sure. It was definitely a very enjoyable conversation. I enjoyed this a lot. Unfortunately, I have, but fortunately as well too. I have a kid that I have to take to school in the morning, so I have to get him ready, help get him ready for bed, and all that fun stuff. I'm sure if you have kids, you already know all
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I got to do the same.
But yeah, we can go through if you want. I'll post some questions up. Looks like Chris Lucas, grace and peace to you, brother. Good to see you. CMB the ambassador, good to see you as well too. Hopefully, you and your family are doing well. I keep both you guys, in my prayers. Um, he has some questions. There are a lot of them, so I'm trying to figure out which ones I want to post up. And it looks like they're for you. Let's see. He said there's a huge issue with evening and morning being in the singular. Evening and morning being in the singular means it has to be about the sacrifice which happens evening and morning, or else it would need to be in the plural form. Now I know he's doing voice to text, so it might be kind of skewed a little bit. But whenever it says hatamid, that is the definite article, and it always means sacrifice. So yeah, that's something you can look into if you're not familiar with that. I made that point earlier today, or earlier in the
Yeah,
discussion.
I basically think that point does involve a level of interpretation and speculation. Obviously, there are scholars and Adventist scholars in the Hebrew and in the well, like I pointed out, a few of them. Roy Gain is one of them. He's a Hebrew scholar. Then there is Jacques Ducan. He's another scholar of Daniel. Davidson, Richard Davidson, is another one. I think when you see the way that word is used throughout Scripture, it is referring to the daily. Now, to emphasize and to kind of latch onto it being in the singular, and then to draw the conclusion that it must mean daily sacrifice, and to exclude the other aspects of the daily, I think that's a level of interpretation. And I kind of would rather stay with the general idea that that word is repeated, and the evening and mornings. And the evening and mornings, again, is a relation to the daily that I pointed out we see in Exodus 27, the last couple of verses, Exodus 29, 38 and 39. We see the incense referred to with the evening and morning and the continual offering of incense. So I think all of these things show us that, okay, this is referring to the daily intercessory ministry. The sacrifice is part of it, but there's the other aspects as well.
Okay, yeah. So here's another question or point he has. He says the problem with him, believe he's referring to you, Michael, to trying to probably he's trying to say trying to have it start with Medo Persia is that we clearly see that the little horn comes up after the Greek king is broken, which is after 323 BC.
Yeah, I thought I addressed that. I guess we have the disagreement on what the vision the question is dealing with in verse number 13. It says, "How long is the vision?" The vision starts, and my position is that the vision is starting with the ram. The vision does concern, it brings us up to that point of the activity of the little horn. But it does start with the ram. So he's saying here the problem with him let me see, am I reading this right? Trying it back to Medo Persia is clear, is
Or
that we clearly,
tying
huh?
tying it back.
I'm sorry, tying
Yeah.
it back to Medo Persia is that we clearly see that the little horn comes up after the Greek king is broken. Yeah, we do see that, but the vision is the question. How long is the vision? And that vision does start with Medo Persia. So I guess that's people have to decide whether that's what that's referring to or not.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to see if there's any other points he brought up. Let's see. He talks
I
about
know this guy too. I know he's gone back and forth with my friend Pastor Kevin Morgan.
Oh, yes, yes. Yes. Actually, Kevin Morgan was on one of my live streams actually, now that I think about it. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
did you
Yeah.
have a talk with him?
No, he was just on one of my lives and I was oh man, what was I talking about? I can't remember. I can't remember, but it was something that he was kind of involved in. I think it might have been a comment thread interaction, and somebody asked me to review it, and so I reviewed it. Yeah, I think that's what it was, and he was part of that conversation, so he happened to find out I was live, and my schedule is so wonky that I don't really do lives ahead of time. I just kind of just do them when I can, and so, but he happened to see that I was live, and he interacted in the comment section.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. Yeah, he's talking about the 1150. But I already made that point. He says, "I wish I knew you were doing this because I have Jewish scholars throughout the centuries saying that it's proper to count it as 1150 days." I'm not sure what scholars he would be referring to, so
Yeah, I
um,
mean, we're always going to be able to find scholars to say what we, obviously not everybody agrees with Adventist scholars.
right. He says, if he thinks it's 2300 years, I got two questions. Why is singular grammar used for evening and morning if it's not referring to the time the daily sacrifice is given and is instead referring to multiple evenings and mornings?
Read that one again. I don't get that question.
There's more to it. I'll read. I'll read all of it, and I'll let you answer it. He says, if he thinks it's 2300 years, I got two questions. Why is singular grammar used for evening and morning if it's not referring to the time the daily sacrifice is given and is instead referring to multiple evenings and mornings? Because if you're going to say it's not talking about when the event is done, what is instead focusing on the amount of evenings and mornings, then you have to explain the bad grammar, and you also have to explain why it's 2300 years, because that's more than the amount of evenings and mornings. So I think what he's saying is, why is the singular used for evenings and mornings and not the plural? I think is his main question.
So if it's singular is used and it says there's 2300, and so singular is used for evening, morning, is that what he's saying?
I think so. Yeah, I'm not studied on the grammar, so I can't really speak. I know he has studied the grammar more than I have. So and again, he's talking in his phone, and his phone is converting that into text. So it might be kind of uh, not that comprehensible at times. But he says singular grammar used for evening and mornings. He's saying that that is used in
Oh,
the text
instead of, in other words, he's saying it
together.
just says evening, morning instead of evenings, mornings.
Correct. Yeah, I believe that's
But
what he's
it's
saying. But
obviously there's 2300 of them.
yeah, so he's trying to say that it's pointing towards the daily, the being the daily sacrifice, I believe is what he's saying. But there could be more to it. Again, I'm not studied on that grammar part.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like, again, there's a stretch going on there because there's an assumption being made that because it's singular, it must mean this. That sounds like, is that what he's saying? Well, because it's singular, it must be referring to the sacrifices?
Uh, let's see.
Well, I don't want you to talk for him. I don't really get the argument. I mean, it's obviously 2300. So whether you say evenings morning or evening morning, it's not my place to question the grammar. I think that these are prophets. They wrote under inspiration, and it says 2300 evening morning. Whether it says evenings mornings, I think that we could. There's obviously 2300 of them. So I don't really understand the argument.
Maybe this comment here kind of clarifies it a little bit more. And then there's a second part to it. It says it's not
Okay.
dividing them up. Period. Evening, morning, 2300 period. What it is telling you is that this hot to meet is done during the evening and morning, so that when the event is done, evening and morning is in the singular. So it's horrible grammar by the angel if they mean 2300. Maybe he'll have to make a video on it or something, or maybe he has a video on it explaining his position more.
Yeah, I mean, you know the Adventist position on when it comes to inspiration. We believe in thought inspiration. We don't believe that God is actually saying, "Okay, use this grammar. Use put a quote, put a comma here, write," because people have questioned the grammar of Paul in his writings, the Greek in his letters versus the book of Hebrews, you know, the grammar in the book of Revelation versus that of the Gospel of John. We believe in thought inspiration, that God would guide the thought of the prophet and not necessarily determine exactly, okay, this is the word you're going to use, and this is how you're going to do it, and this is going to do that. So as far as the grammar being used as an argument against to determine that 2300 evenings mornings must be referring to an evening morning sacrifice, and then that, because it's not in the because it's singular, that means that we're justified in dividing it into evening, dividing up that unit of evenings, mornings, which throughout the Bible we could see referring to a daily unit. But now we're justified in saying, well, now it should be broken down into 1,150 days. I think that's a stretch to come up with all that.
I'm not sure how many more of these you want to answer. There's a few more if you want to. If not, we can end here. I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, I know. I could try. That's up to you. I don't. I it does not really much of a problem for me. It'd probably be
Okay.
only a few more minutes, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'll probably yeah, a few more minutes. So he says another problem he's having was saying that the little horn is coming out of Greece is that Rome existed before Alexander the Great. Rome was very powerful and was equal in power to the four horns that was broken, so it wouldn't be a little horn if it can beat up those horns.
I don't think that's a good argument because, yeah, it's true that Rome existed before Alexander the Great, but Rome did take from Greece. Rome did take from Greece culturally, politically, religiously, in plenty of ways. So that's the point, and that's pretty that's pretty basic. I mean, you do a quick AI search, get an AI answer on that. It's pretty basic that. So it doesn't matter that it exists. Greek culture didn't start at Alexander the Great, so it didn't
Yeah.
start there. And can you go back to that second part of that question? Rome was very powerful and was equal in power to the four horns that were broken, so it wouldn't be a little horn if it can beat up. The little horn is it's not saying it's not powerful. To say that it's a little horn, obviously that little horn was powerful because it is presented as being greater ultimately than the other two kingdoms. And the language of the little horn also relates to the little horn we see in chapter 7. So the fact that the little horn is more powerful than the unified kingdom under Greece and under and Medo-Persia shows that it can't be Antiochus the fourth, according to what we see in Daniel 8:23. Oh,
So kind of
22. I think it's 22.
I think this might be continuing on his thought. He says even if he wanted to say it came out of one of the four winds, which the Hebrew grammar does not allow for, Rome was equal in power to the other four horns, so it's not a little horn. So I think what he's saying is that Rome was already its own power, equal to one of the four horns, and that little horn is something that is not the Roman power. Is basically what his argument is. I think.
Yeah, and I think that, he's saying that the Hebrew grammar does not allow for. So basically, I'm to take this person's Hebrew scholarship and put it over the scholarship of Hebrew scholars like Richard Davidson or Jacques Ducan or any other Hebrew scholar. So that's really a matter of scholarship. I mean, scholars disagree all the time. So it's kind of like saying, well, I'm going to trust Tovia Singer's Hebrew over a Christian scholar's Hebrew. Now, obviously, Tovia Singer is an anti-Christian, and so he'll say, well, these Christian scholars who translated the Bible, they're wrong. You should trust me over them. So I mean, to argue that Hebrew grammar, well, not all scholars are agreeing it. Obviously, there are scholars who say it would be justified by that. And then to say that Rome was equal in power to the other horns, so it's not a little horn. And again, as I pointed out, the relationship between Greece and Rome is unique in that Rome did, in a sense, come out of Greece in terms of its culture. But to say that just because it uses the term little, that must mean it's not powerful. Obviously, it is powerful because the little horn is the biggest enemy there is in both Daniel chapters 7 and 8. The little horn turns out to be the biggest enemy there is.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. I think he's taking the more of a preterist approach to Matthew 24. He has comments on Matthew 24 saying that it was to be fulfilled in the Jews' generation. I'm sure you've heard that before. We see that Daniel chapter 26. We see the evening and morning are both in definite article. Okay. Good point. We continue on that. I think that might, let's see, that might be it. He's still in the chat, so he looks like he's interacting kind of with what you're saying. Okay, so he kind of clarifies a little bit, I think, here, what he was talking about earlier. He says, I argue it's correct grammar talking about the amount of evenings and mornings, but instead when the event of the sacrifice happens. Therefore, it's proper to say evening, morning, 2300.
I argue it's correct
Perfect.
grammar because it's not talking about the amount of evenings. It's not talking about the amount of evenings and mornings, I guess is what he means there.
Yeah.
But instead, when the event of the sacrifice happens. In other words, he's saying that it happens in the evening and morning, I guess.
Yeah. So he says right here, evening and morning is when it happens. 2300 is the amount of sacrifices.
2,300 is the amount of sacrifices. Again, that's so. Long story short, this reasoning is used to justify splitting up evenings mornings.
Yeah. Yep. Sounds like what he's saying. Yep.
Yeah, and again, I think that's a matter of interpretation that I think throughout Scripture we don't see justified to break up. And it's Roy Gain, like I said, he's a scholar of Hebrew. So I mean, if we're talking about Hebrew scholarship, and he would disagree with that as well. But I just think based on what I know just by reading the text, we see that terminology used. Now you might say, well, it's not exactly like what we see somewhere else. But God gives prophets different visions, and prophets are, like Ellen White said, the prophets are God's penmen, but they're not his pen. So they write in the way that they write. Each one has their own style. But I think the general idea of evenings, mornings in relation to the days of creation, there was evening, morning, and the day in relation to the daily ministry, makes it clear that this is referring to days, and there's 2,300 of them. So I think the idea that to say because it's singular, that means it must be referring to a sacrifice in the morning and a sacrifice in the evening, and therefore you get the 1150. Which again, I don't see none of the texts even mention that number 1150. So, and even when you were pointing out that you thought that it related to what was seen in First Maccabees 129, I think you pointed to there. But even you admitted, well, it doesn't actually give that number either. So I think that's speculative. But I mean, we all have to, everybody's got to pray on these things and make up their mind.
Yeah. I think I'll give you, I'll let you have that. And I think we'll probably end with that. There are no more questions. Grace and peace to you, rebuke and reprove. So again, Michael, I do appreciate you coming on very much. It was a very enjoyable conversation. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well.
Yes,
Um,
yes, I did.
awesome. Yeah. And so I pray you and your family are kept and are safe over there. And if we speak again, then it should be another good conversation.
Okay, thank you, my brother. God bless you.
All right. Take care. God
Take
bless.
care. God bless.